Blue Train, Coal Train, here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. While the Eliot Spitzer stories dominated the news media for the past 2 days, little coverage has been paid to the plight of sex workers in this country. Joining us in our Firehouse studio is Juhu Thukral. She is director of the Sex Workers Project of the Urban Justice Institute. The Sex Workers Project provides legal services and legal training for sex workers. In 2006, Thukral co-authored a report called Behind Closed Doors, an analysis of indoor sex work in New York City. We're also joined by Wayne Barrett, senior editor over at the Village Voice. Juan?
Yeah, I'd like to first just get back to the actual case with Spitzer again, Wayne, to talk about the laws that he has so far, not even allegedly, because there hasn't been any real formal charges yet, but the laws he faces possible charges on.
Well, he could be charged under the Mann Act because he paid for the transportation of this woman from New York to D.C. for the liaison that you referred to at the top of the show. So that's a Mann Act violation. It's 1910 law. Very few prosecutions under that law have occurred in recent decades, but theoretically, that's what they were investigating.
And it's rarely, even more rarely, against someone who's a client rather than an actual organizer.
And now, what they are talking about a great deal now is structuring, which is the attempt on his part, apparently, to conceal the payments that he was making to the prostitution ring. And the structuring allegation is based on whether or not he was trying to remain under the $10,000 threshold. A transaction with a bank that involves a withdrawal of more than $10,000 is supposed to be reported to the government, and whether or not he was avoiding that. The irony really, and of course there's so much about this case that we don't understand, it was made extremely quickly
That's what I want to ask you. As somebody who has covered a lot of federal investigations, this is an astonishingly rapid progress.
Juan, not only that, I mean, they had wires on 2 phones, and they had a warrant approved by the court for those wires that would have extended, in one case, for almost another full month. And they brought the case down when they had wires on these lines. They wanted one man. They wanted one man only. Maybe too many rich guys were walking through the, coming through on the same wires. Whatever the reason is, they brought these wires down almost instantly as soon as they closed the deal on Eliot. And so I find it to be a very peculiar investigation. Now, what I don't understand about the structuring allegation is clearly you can pick up that client number 9, Eliot Spitzer, refused to deal by wire transfer. And now they're saying he had wire transfers that would have exceeded the $10,000 limit, and that's what caused the investigation to start. But you can clearly see from the court record that he refused, in this instance at least, to make any payments by wire transfer. So there's a lot of unanswered questions about how this
happened, that he takes money out of the bank at lower than $10,000, but keeps on taking out this on HSBC, I think they're saying now, the bank, and then they alert the IRS and say it looks like this money is going somewhere, perhaps as an organized crime or whatever. They're trying to figure it out.
Right, and yet the transaction,
some $80,000 doing this.
And yet there were hookers that Emperor's Club had that charged as much as $25,000, but it doesn't appear that Eliot Spitzer ever had a single transaction involving something exceeding $10,000. So it's unclear to me why he would need to make withdrawals over $10,000 at one time. That's unclear to me. But look, there's an awful lot that's unclear about this case. The thing that is clear is that his conduct was deplorable and should cost him his office. But why the feds were doing this, whether this was another one of, keep in mind that it's almost 6-to-1 Democrats that are investigated and prosecuted by the Bush Justice Department. They see something come in on this powerful governor of New York, and suddenly an investigation is triggered that is extremely unusual. You're not likely to read much about this in the media because every newspaper is depending on leaks here. And transactions that newspapers make and the media companies make with prosecutors is you don't knock a case that you're looking for a leak on. So what we've got is this really unvarnished copy about this, which is kind of saluting this investigation because everybody's looking for a piece of it.
Well, Juhu Thukral, I'd like to bring you in on this, and especially this issue of the Mann Act and what your organization was doing, especially even with Governor Spitzer and how he was reacted to some of the reforms you were trying to bring about.
Last year, New York State passed anti-trafficking law, and it's actually one of the toughest laws in the country. And Eliot Spitzer was very important in pushing the law through. We've been working on the law for the last couple of years, but there was a great deal of controversy around certain elements of the bill. And, for example, we opposed a provision that he pushed through. We and numerous other advocates, which actually enhanced the penalties against clients of prostitutes. And our perspective is this is a trafficking law. Let's leave it focused on trafficking and on traffickers. And also, the more that you go after clients and customers of prostitutes, the less likely they are to actually come forward when you have knowledge, for example, of a woman that you've seen who's in danger. We've actually had clients call us and refer women to us so that we can help them protect their legal rights. And we've taken these women on as clients. So really, it depends on what your goal is. Do you want to help people, and do you want to make sure that people feel comfortable coming forward when they have information?
Now, just to reiterate and just to understand, you're saying you worked with the governor. There were other groups involved with this, like
numerous other groups. Yes.
Some of them were
there was Safe Horizon. There was Equality Now. There was, the Bar Association of New York.
And Eliot Spitzer took on a crusading rule here, pushing through laws that would increase penalties against Johns, against the client.
Yes.
And this happened last year.
This happened just last year. The law went into
so
effect
presumably
on
he was
November
pushing
1st.
the toughening penalties at the same time he himself was being a client of some, according to what the reports we've heard so far.
I mean, that's what it appears to be. And our biggest concern is really the fact that the more that you push the sort of pressure of arrest on customers and on prostitutes, they're much less likely to actually come forward when they need help. So our concerns are when a prostitute is assaulted by somebody, by a customer. Not all customers are violent, but when they are, we want to make sure that they're willing to come forward and say, look, I've been a victim of a crime. And we get a lot of calls from women saying, I've been a victim, I was assaulted. Sometimes the customer is a police officer himself, and they are terrified of going forward. When we are able to go forward, we often find that the police don't do anything. So the reason that we oppose these kinds of enhancing penalties against customers is that in the long run, it just drives people further underground. And there have been studies that have shown that this doesn't work very well.
Though you were in the minority of the women's rights groups on that, because they were pushing for, instead of the woman being the one who's constantly rounded up, picked up, arrested, and thrown out, the sex worker, that the Johns would be focused on. The people like, well, presumably Eliot Spitzer, and he may now be subject to his own law that he pushed through.
There were a number of women's rights groups who agreed with Eliot Spitzer, obviously, but there were also a lot of groups that didn't agree with that position because, again, it sounds like it's a good answer. Let's go ahead and arrest everybody, and that's going to end prostitution. But the truth is, people go into prostitution most often because they're really desperate for money, or they are looking around, they're not able to make enough money. A lot of our clients have jobs in the mainstream and then supplement it with sex work because they don't have enough to live on. The report that we released, we've released 2 reports in the last few years on sex workers in New York City. 2/3 of them say that they can't make a living wage in jobs that they've had. The jobs that they have are things like waitressing, working in an office, doing retail, sales, that type of thing. And so we're finding people are pushed into sex work often for economic reasons. And so going after customers, what that often does is even put people in more dangerous situations because they are then going and agreeing to meet with customers that they may not otherwise see because there aren't as many customers around.
And what about the Mann Act? It's been rarely used, but there's also some discussion of a possible expansion or changes in it. Could you talk about that as well?
The Mann Act is often used in trafficking cases. There's a federal trafficking law, and sometimes charges are brought under the Mann Act as well, just to sort of make it a very complete prosecution. But right now, Congress is in the middle of reauthorizing this anti-trafficking law, the federal law, and they are looking at an expansion of the Mann Act. And again, that's what we're opposing that as well, because what they're trying to do, currently the Mann Act prohibits transporting people across state lines for the purposes of prostitution. What they want to do now is also have this federal law prohibit transportation within states, but a lot of organizations have come out because this is a states' rights issue. This is a local crime that's best dealt with local police and with local district attorney's offices. And DOJ, the Department of Justice, has actually opposed this provision. A lot of members of national anti-trafficking organizations have opposed it, and a lot of policing organizations have opposed this expansion.
It's interesting. The Mann Act was called the White Slave Traffic Act of 1910, and the people most famously prosecuted under it, rarely used, are people like, well, heavyweight boxing champ Jack Johnson, first man prosecuted under the act for having an affair with Lucille Cameron, whom he later married. The prosecution manifestly an effort to get